AI native startups and AI enterprises have been moving at different speeds, getting different things done, using different tool stacks. And for the most part, when I look at the discourse online, when I talk to founders in the small startup category, when I talk to CEOs of large companies, what I hear is two entirely different worlds. And frankly, a lot of disappointment in what's framed as the other side. I would like to instead take the time to look at six different core learnings that have emerged from studying both startups and enterprises as they grapple with the transition to AI at the same time, but under very different conditions. So this should apply to you if you are working in a large company environment, but equally if you are working in a small company, or even if you're just a solo founder. If you've ever wondered, what is the difference between these two environments besides size, and how is that impacting AI besides the really obvious one of the big companies often go slower and they get mocked for it and they shouldn't? Well, I'm here to disentangle all of that, give you the learnings, and then have some reflections on where this is going in the rest of 2025. So, number one, let's get into those core learnings. Different constraints will create different correct answers. Startups and enterprises just aren't playing the same game. They're playing different sports with different rules, effectively. When a startup founder ships a broken feature to 10 customers, well, you can personally call everyone if that breaks. And so vibe coding is very viable. When a PM ships to 10,000 healthcare customers, one data leak could trigger lawsuits, lose the biggest contracts that the business has, and eventually destroy the company. The standards are very different. The founder, solo founder, can rebuild the entire code base over a weekend. The PM must maintain systems with database columns that stem back to migrations in, 2008. The startup founder who burns thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars a month in AI credits isn't actually being reckless, even if a lot of those credits get used and reused across the same part of the code base. Effectively, he or she is buying the equivalent of 3 or 4 developers working 24/7, trying to solve the really difficult problem of product market fit. The enterprise, on the other hand, is going to take several months to approve GitHub Copilot, but they have SOX compliance. They have enterprise customers doing security audits. They have a board that demands very predictable quarterly results. They don't have the same game or the same rules. And my reflection for you on this is that you play the game that your customer wants you to play. And this is actually more profound than you would think, because many times startup founders end up having to act more big company because they are in the B2B space and they're trying to serve larger and larger customers. And so they end up getting themselves into this world where they have to do compliance audits and enterprise and this and that. And that doesn't mean they lose their sort of fast, young, scrappy DNA, but they do have to start to shade more toward the enterprise space faster. On the other hand, if you are serving hungry startups and that is your primary customer base, well, yeah, you want to be as hungry as you can. If you are serving AI savvy builders, AI savvy consumers, you want to be as quick as you can, and you want to actually make sure that you are iterating faster than anybody else. And finally, if you're serving consumers as a whole, which is a different demographic, you want to be in a position where you can make the change translatable and manageable to them. I saw a great ad from Google that really illustrates this, I think. The ad, without generating any liability for Google, took a poke at Apple and basically said, without using the word Apple, that another big phone company had made a lot of promises about AI and hadn't kept them, which everyone knows. Apple made a big deal about rolling out AI and couldn't keep it. And then suggested maybe the step forward is to actually work with a phone that can keep its promises, right? You need to make these big AI changes feel natural and feel easy for consumers. And that leads to an interesting hybrid. So the first sort of demographic change is like, if you're serving business customers, you're going to be pushed into a more business quarterly cadence kind of workflow just naturally, and you have to fight that to go faster. On the other hand, if you're serving super AI conscious consumers or builders or solo founders or tiny startups, you're going to be pushed to go faster yourself. And then in the third category, if you're serving consumers, you are going to be pushed to make sure that you can translate the change and make it easy to understand. And that tends to lead you to a slightly more unpredictable cadence. You basically have to wait till you have the thing that you know the consumer is going to want and then double down there. Those are three different worlds. Essentially, what I'm suggesting to you is that instead of assuming your given size dictates the game and just letting it be, think about it as your customer would like you to work at an ideal pace. What is that pace? And maybe see if you can shift the constraint set in that direction. Number two, AI changes what building software is. We talk about it a lot, but I want to simplify it a little bit. AI changes building software to a conversation. I think Dan Schipper at Every is a good example. He can have a conversation with Claude Code that eventually becomes a feature. And not just him, other people who are non-engineers can have that too in his company. If you can get to a point where you can describe what you want, increasingly, if it is a fairly buildable, small-scale piece of software, the AI can do it for you. Maybe it's not Claude Code, maybe it's Codex, but it can still do it for you. Maybe it's lovable.dev, right? And vibe coding sounds too good to be true until you see it work. I have had moments, and I think this is actually really important to do. So listen up if you work in a bigger company. I have had moments where I've talked with directors and above at larger companies, and they just don't have time. They all have meetings. They don't have time for practicing vibe coding, for seeing how lovable works, etc. Pull up lovable.dev and show them how easy it is to build something. I have seen jaws drop. In a sense, part of the gap in AI is just knowing what you can do and having the time to try it. And so part of why there's a speed gap that people assume is true between startups and enterprises is that the startups have nothing to lose by dramatically shifting the way they build software, and the enterprise has a lot to lose. The enterprise has engineering debt. And it's non-trivial. I don't want to set this up as like an obvious choice to go with a startup. As an example, if you are shipping AI code changes, shipping AI code lines over time, you run the risk of your code base at scale, at enterprise scale, becoming less understandable to you. That in turn generates a tremendous amount of cognitive debt, particularly for senior engineers. And so it's not as simple as saying, well, you have to get with the program and just ship more AI code and go faster. You actually have to think about how organizational size dictates different approaches to AI. I would argue in this case, AI is a conversational process regardless, but it's easier to start the conversation for startups. And for larger companies, it's more difficult to start that conversation. You may have elements that feel conversational that only happen after you've done all of the requirements and compliance pieces. And that's what I see anecdotally at larger companies. They do all of those initial steps first, and then the creation of the software ends up being more sort of conversational wherever they can, right? If they're using Claude, if they're using Cursor, other tools. Principle number 3, technical debt is increasingly optional. So I think there's a number of dynamics here. Another way I've talked about it is that the cost of technical debt is going negative. Code quality at AI native startups ranges widely. If you have a very strong engineering founder on the team, it's often higher, but it doesn't have to be all that high to ship these days. There are startups where no one knows how to code and they're doing over $1 million in ARR. And I want to suggest that what that implies is that you could always buy your way out of technical debt with time and with good engineers. And increasingly, time is not the factor. Scale is not the factor. You just need to have enough scale to be able to afford a production engineer to refactor something if you need it. But that is often so far down the road that you kind of don't care for a while. If you can hit $1 million off of vibe coding, which literally the first startup that has hit $1 million off of Lovable already exists, you don't really worry about technical debt. You don't worry about whether you fully understand the code base. You just worry about whether you're shipping for the customer. Now, if you have to pass compliance as an enterprise company, you do worry about the code base. It's not optional to care. Technical debt can become a legal liability. And so I think that this is one of those areas where we are living in a movable constraint set, and we need to understand the next 6 or 8 months. Code is one of the spaces in AI where tech is invested so heavily in leveling up the ability of AI to agentically fix code that we are going to get massive breakthroughs in the next few months. That suggests to me that the problem of refactoring, even in large code bases, is going to get progressively easier. I don't think that's the same thing as saying that AI will be able to do senior engineering work, because senior engineering work is a lot more than refactoring code bases. But it is something that we should keep in mind, because what it suggests is that the cost of technical debt has fallen, yes, is probably negative for startups, yes, but is also falling for larger companies very, very quickly. This is the source of some of those big headlines you see where Amazon or others say publicly, we saved so many thousand man years by using AI to transition our code from this language to that language. And they're doing it already, right? They're going to do it even more as the ability to handle context windows gets better, as these AI agents become more proactive and able to work around problems, etc. This is a lot of the reason why ChatGPT 5 is agentic, because it's designed to solve problems like this. So what's interesting is technical debt is becoming optional. It's becoming something you don't have to care about at a startup level. But I think the thing that I take away from that is that in a lot of ways, startups were always advised not to care about tech debt in the first place. And so what's changed is that they're still told not to care about it, but now they don't really have to pay to clean up the mess either. Like, they don't have this huge bill that comes due at Series A or Series B to clean up all of their architecture in the same way, because it's so much cheaper and faster to address it. Enterprises still have the compliance burden, but the cost of addressing it is rapidly improving as well. And so this is one to watch. This is one where I think we'd have a different conversation in 6 months. Number 4, success starts with pain. Every AI adoption story that you see starts with a team or a founder drowning in work that embraces AI as a band-aid. That's a very consistent pattern. It extends to the consumer too. People don't embrace stuff unless it immediately solves a real problem. And so when you think about or want to criticize how enterprises are adopting AI, one of the things that you need to think about is how real is the pain at the level of the team in the enterprise? Does the team feel the pain of not adopting AI? Because startups feel that pain right on the revenue line. If they're not moving fast enough, if they're not shipping fast enough, somebody doesn't get paid that month. Whereas for larger companies, where's the consequence to half-heartedly adopting ChatGPT and only using it to write your emails? It's not a lot in most enterprises. So success has to start with pain. And one of the things that I think that we've done a poor job of in mid-size and above companies is really making it clear that the pain may not be acute, but it's real, and it's going to hit the company in a existential way in the next few years if they don't address it. I do not believe in a world where an enterprise can whistle by the graveyard and skip AI and get away with it. Almost every company is going to have to confront this. And the longer they wait to confront it directly, the worse off it will be for them. And so this is a case where I think startups should be kinder to enterprises in mid-market, because they should recognize that getting an entire company to feel pain is a very difficult art. It takes real leadership. Steve Jobs had it. Not everybody has that leadership. If you are a leader in a mid-size or larger company, part of your job is to get your team to feel pain until they start to adopt AI. Number 5, the workflow matters more than the tools. I have sat there in conference rooms and talked to larger companies, and they just sort of make long faces and they're sad. They say, well, we can't get ChatGPT. We can't get Claude Code. All we can do is we can use Copilot. The workflow matters more than the tools. The workflow matters more than the tools. I have written an entire guide for how to use Copilot. It exists. It's out there. You can get it. It's right on Substack. But it's not about my guide. It's about the idea that you can integrate any AI tool into a good workflow. And if you actually use it, it will beat the smartest tool out there that people don't integrate into their workflows. Part of how startups have an advantage here is because one brain can hold the whole workflow. One brain can hold the whole workflow. And in a larger company, that's not true. You have to have a lot of people working together to shift a workflow, and coordination problems take time to solve. This is actually one of the reasons why I think that the excited guesses that AI would take a bunch of jobs at the enterprise, if you're trying to design workflows across multiple teams, the sheer fragmented knowledge is actually really, really hard to overcome. It's actually not something AI does a good job of. It's something humans do a good job of. Humans need to come together, do AI sprints, do something that helps you to figure out as a larger team how to actually build an AI first workflow that doesn't just stop at the level of the individual or stop at the level of the small team. And one of the things that I notice about this is that startups assume that, again, their speed is their advantage, which I suppose is true, and the other guys are bad at what they're doing. And that is not true. Workflow has 100 to 1,000 times more leverage at a larger company. I could run workflows when I was at Amazon that would shift the way thousands and hundreds of thousands of titles worked. Well, you can't do that at a startup because you don't have the product for it. Workflow matters more than tools, and workflows are higher stakes and higher leverage at bigger companies. And it is more important to get them right, and it takes more people to get them right. And so you have to work together to build AI workflows at big companies in a way you don't at startups. Number 6, experience tends to create resistance. This is counterintuitive. We like to think if only they could see AI, everything would be good. My observation is that is not always true. People will try AI. They'll have one or two disappointing experiences. If they have a prior suspicion of AI, they will just use that suspicion and those one or two experiences as a reason to say, no, I'm done, especially if they're worried about their role or they're worried about having to change what they know. I know developers who are walking out of tech rather than deal with the AI change. They're like, I want to go do something else, right? Like they can take up a hobby, something else. This is an area where if you are getting started, you can have an advantage in your career by being AI native from the beginning. Because there are enough senior people who are not ready for this kind of change and voting with their feet to say, I'm done. I don't have to work on this right now. I'm leaving. Well, as a junior person, you can step in. You can be the one that shows that experience doesn't have to create resistance. Again, startups' advantage here comes from having fewer people. You can handpick your people. Your people all can be people for whom experience creates optimism and forward motion. People for whom experience is a good thing. People who are AI native. At a larger company, you have to work with the people you have, many of whom have domain knowledge that is highly specialized that you can't move out. And so the problem then becomes, how do we make sure that the resistance tendency is down leveled and minimized as much as possible across this large multi-thousand person company? That is a different kind of hiring reality. You're looking at incentives, you're looking at team leadership, you're looking at how you can make training matter to different teams with widely different needs. You're looking at honest conversations about what it means to have career growth at a larger company with AI. And I'm going to remind you again, the senior developers and the principal developers at large companies, on the whole, are higher quality engineers than most of the engineers at smaller startups that I've worked with. I've worked with both. I love working. There's a reason I go to startups. I've loved startups because of how fast they've moved. But the kinds of quality engineers that you see who are lifers at these larger companies, absolutely extraordinary. And it is very rare to see them in the startup world unless they are founders. And so as much as startups would like to say, well, we can just pick good people and we're just amazing, like, you know what? I doubt that most of your engineers operate at the level of the senior principal engineers at Meta or at Apple or at Amazon or at Microsoft. And so in a sense, you have to pay the piper. If people that good want to take their time understanding AI, you have to make sure that you bring them along. And that's another difference. So those are 6 principles we've gone through, right? Experience creates resistance. Workflow matters more than tools. Success starts with pain. Technical debt is becoming more and more optional. That one's really fluid. AI changes what building software is all about. It makes it a conversation, and different constraints create different correct answers. Let's step back and let's look at the future. What is actually happening here? Number one, the velocity gap is real and growing. I think that that's something that I emphasize a lot when I talk to leaders at midsize and above businesses, because disruption risk is in some ways a function of velocity, and AI enables such a velocity differential for AI native startups that traditional enterprises should be more worried. AI native startups can be orders of magnitude faster than the regular startups of the 2010s. If you can ship a feature in an hour that would have taken 2 weeks in a team of engineers in 2018, well, you are definitely going faster than startups went a decade ago. And that poses more disruption risk to enterprise over the long term. These are fundamentally different realities. They're fundamentally different physics for startups. But velocity without direction is speed. And so the risk of startups shipping 20 versions a week is that they don't have the discipline to learn, and they're just accumulating chaos. And that is the one advantage enterprises bring. They put so much intention into a ship. If they do one solid version in 6 months, but it actually builds on itself and it builds a flywheel of value for customers, they might still win. So the question really isn't who is right. The question is what happens in a world where startups are 10x faster than they were, and AI is desperately trying to crack through in the enterprise. Will startup velocity actually disrupt enterprise reliability? Will enterprise reliability and enterprise customer distribution win? This is the question we're facing. And this is the question that AI adoption is actually driving at in both of these environments. It really matters. Dario Amodei predicted that AI would write 90% of code in 2025. Technically, that is true at some startups, and it is becoming more true at enterprises, and those mean two different things. At startups, I buy it. If AI writes 95% of your code at startups, you are going fast the way we've talked about. If AI writes 90% of your code or 60% or 70% of your code at a large company, I think the CEO of Coinbase said that something like 60% of the code at his company was written by AI. I immediately ask questions because it's a different kind of problem. Are you incentivizing your engineers by lines of code at that scale? Because you don't have that problem at a startup. You just want to ship the feature. But at scale, where people are incentivized by goals and metrics, if you say it's lines of code, will people just be incentivized to write big, bloated features to hit the lines of code goal? Anecdotally, that is absolutely happening. And so my question at a large scale is, should you be even thinking in percentage terms? And then two, is Dario simplifying the world too much? And maybe what we're headed for is a bifurcated world where you have AI assisted code composition and structuring at larger companies. And I don't care or know what the percentage is. It's a meaningful percentage of code that you could say is written by AI, but humans have a huge role to play in how they structure it because of the complexity of the system. And then it's nearly 100% of code written at small startups. That feels like a more realistic world. I will also call out, this is continuing a trend where large model makers are making predictions that are directionally true. But when we come up to the actual deadline and we look at it, we're like, it's a little early. I think that one of the things I'm learning to do with Sam and with Dario and with other major model maker CEOs is I discount their predictions by a year or two. I take whatever they say, and I'm like, give it another year or two beyond what they say. Because they live in this world where they have better models than are out in the public. They are immersed in AI all the time. They may not have the perspective to see this wider world. So where does this leave us? We need to be building companies that reflect the constraints of the game we're actually in, that focus on what customers need in a world where, frankly, customer appetites, customer demand is shifting really rapidly. And we need to recognize that the stakes are existential. If we as a startup, we as midsize, we as enterprise, don't figure out how to meaningfully build AI into our workflows, the disruption risk is real and fast. It's like in Jurassic Park, where the raptors kept getting smarter. Other businesses are like those raptors. They're going to keep getting smarter and keep getting more AI enabled, and they're going to catch you unless you're able to actually put AI into place. And so My suggestion to you is that you should, if you are a large company, look at those small company learnings, look at the small company tool stack, see what you can learn, see what you can learn about speed. If you are a startup, if you're in the small company category, see what you can learn from the reliability, the stability, the system architecture of the big company. At least acquire some sympathy for where they're at, because that may be you, particularly if you serve businesses. Both parties here have a lot to learn from one another, and I sometimes feel like I'm the only one talking to both, and they mostly want to throw rocks at each other. So everybody's in this together. We're all learning AI together. Let's see what we can build.